So we've got folks joining. Welcome to Art Viewing Adventures. Rodney Paul here with my friends Fred Silverman and Verena Lukas. How are you both doing today?
Doing just well.
And
commenting on this.
So we're going to be talking about Bernd and Hilla Becher. But first, I'll just ask both of you, so in addition to this, what are some of the other things you're excited about at local San Francisco museums?
Verena, go ahead.
I didn't warn you guys I'd ask you that, but
Oh, are you talking to us?
yeah. Tell us, is there anything else you've run across in the museums that you're excited about right now?
Yeah, I mean, we have this show at SFMOMA, and the other really great show, I've seen it several times, is Joan Brown.
Yep, Joan Brown, which we did a show on last time, 2
Yeah.
weeks ago, and then 2 weeks from now. You guys hearing me okay, by the way? My internet seems to be a little quirky. You guys hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So in 2 weeks, Avril Angevine is going to be back, and she's going to talk about California pop and Joan Brown's place and all that. So we're going to continue talking about that. But we're excited about this show. We'll be jumping in talking about the Bechers in a minute or so. Hey, Fred, what about you? What are your thoughts on stuff at museums?
At SFMOMA, I just saw the exhibit of the SICA Award winners, which is awards given to, I guess, early to mid-career artists. 5 different people, absolutely fascinating. If you're in the museum, it's also in the free floor, which is great. Very interesting art. And also, I paid my first visit to the newest museum in town, ICA. I think it's Institute for Contemporary Art, which is in Dogpatch. Which is a wonderful new addition to the art scene in San Francisco. They have their kind of inaugural exhibit up now, but I urge everybody to check that place out.
Oh, that's I didn't even know about that, Fred. That's really exciting news. We've got a new museum joining the mix, and maybe Art Viewing Adventures will need to do a show about this first inaugural show that they're doing. Cool. Well, I think we are at 1 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and get started. This is Art Viewing Adventures. We've been talking about the art scene since we started the show in 2020, and we do this every second and fourth Monday of the month. I am very pleased to be joined by my fellow museum guides, Fred Silverman and Verena Lukas. Both of you are guides at a museum that is in the South of Market area, that has a lot of art that's untitled. So I often call it the Unnamed Museum of Art, or SFMOMA. And that's where this show is actually at that very same museum, which I suppose we could say who they are. It's SFMOMA. And we're going to be talking about this great photography show that's up right now and on view, I think, for what? Do you guys know? It goes through like March, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
I have the SFMOMA mailer right here, I will tell you.
So hope you guys, we want to urge you to get over there and see these photographs in person.
April 2nd, it closes.
April 2nd. So you have a couple months to check this out. And we, the three of us, went and talked about some of our favorite photographs. We're going to get into that. But first, actually, Nikki, I want to ask you, do you have anything to tell us from our hosts, the Community Living Campaign?
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'll be brief because you've probably heard this dozens of times if you're one of our loyal followers. The Community Living Campaign in San Francisco is a nonprofit dedicated to advocacy and offering certain services to elders in San Francisco, as well as people with disabilities. So we offer exercise classes around the city, and we offer a lot of tech support because we're really concentrated on bridging that digital divide between seniors and tech. And it's just so important that, people will get over their fears and get comfortable with tech, because, you never know when you're going to have to meet with your lawyer or somebody doctor or even family, and be familiar with Zoom and how to get around that. So anyhow, I really encourage you to look at our website. I will put the link on the chat. And then every 2 months, we do offer our calendar, which we send out by mail, or you can just look at it online. It's my guide for the week of activities that I'm involved with or helping with. So anyway, that's the community living campaign, and we do have a lot of followers here of this art program, which is really outstanding. I'm so glad that I fell into it by accident, when they started scheduling, and I just feel really attached to the show and to Rodney and look forward to it. So thanks everybody for coming in today, and welcome Fred, Verena, and our tech Jennifer.
Yep. Thanks as always, Jennifer, for being our tech moderator. We always appreciate that. So we're going to talk about Bernd and Hilla Becher. They were a couple who did photography of industrial in kind of, I guess, I don't know, is that the right way to describe them? I think of them as taking pictures of industrial sites in Germany and in the other parts like the US, Wales. What else should we say about them, Fred and Verena?
Well, I think it's fair to describe them as focusing on industry. I think that's probably how they would describe themselves.
Yeah, and we'll jump in. This is a fairly typical image from the exhibition and from their body of work. What's notable about this? What do you? Let me ask you first, Verena. Why do we consider this art? What do you like about it?
Well, first of all, the thing about the main thing about Bernd and Hilla Becher is that they did typographies, meaning that they photographed something, in this case, industrial things, then they laid them out and they put them together in such a way that they are aesthetically pleasing. Maybe not to all, but to some. And another thing that you might notice, this may be too early for it, there is a sameness about this. The sameness is, look at the background, look at the horizon, look at what's in front of it. The Bechers had a way to photograph these things to basically to show people that they are to be reckoned with. They're not only functional, but they could also be aesthetically pleasing.
And so, Fred, what do you think? Do you consider these aesthetically pleasing? And I know both you and Verena are photographers. What, as a photographer, do you see in these images?
Well, first of all, I think you need to be somewhat attracted to what it is they're photographing. If you don't like industry, or if you have associations with it, either from your childhood or the condition of laborers or pollution or something, it might affect how you look at these as objects. But I think the Bechers show us that even kind of putting those things aside, if you can, these are objects of beauty. They might not have been designed to be that way. We'll probably get into that in some of the other photographs, but there's something wonderful and almost magical about, in this case, a sphere. We think about balls of all kinds, globes of all kinds, the planets. There's something very, very, it's symmetrical, it's even, it's smooth. And to follow up on something Verena said, not only did they go out and look for particular objects that they wanted to photograph, but even though they did some of these series over multiple years, in some cases decades, they always wanted to find light that was very neutral. So no shadows, very, very plain background. In fact, they often waited for days that were overcast so they wouldn't get a lot of shadows, and sort of a different treatment of light on the objects that they photographed. So I think they had a very aesthetic approach to photographing things that in and of themselves had aesthetic value.
Yeah, you're noting the neutral background, and it's really, we kind of just take it for granted that these things all have very similar backgrounds, but that isn't something that's so easily achieved. They had to really work at that.
Can I add something?
Sure.
most people see photography, they see one beautiful photograph, Ansel Adams, whoever, and you appreciate it. The Beckers are doing it differently. They're coming between documentary and art. And the way these buildings are beautiful, in a way, to me at least, because they're in a series. They're not alone. If I just saw one alone, okay. But now seeing them all together, you're starting to see, my God, they have a function and they're all different. And that to me is really interesting. I have to look at every single one. And now I know what gas tanks look like.
Let's look at another typology. This one's water towers. They did a lot of water towers. What do we get from this? I'll start with you, Fred.
Well, I think one of the things I want to point about a lot of their photography, and it really shows that very nicely with the water tower in the middle and the top row, Finley, is that they ensured that all of the lines were perpendicular and parallel. Often when you take a picture, which I'm sure we all have, of looking up at a building or any kind of object, you don't get those absolutely straight parallel lines. There are angles. And there's something to be said for the objectivity, the neutrality is often the word you hear about them, of taking pictures in that way. And they actually had a camera that enabled them to literally tilt the angle of the lens so that it was parallel, flat with the object they were photographing, so you didn't get those kinds of angles. And I think the other thing is that's obvious from this is that as a typology, unlike the spheres of the gas tanks, which were quite similar, these are all water towers from several countries, and just look how different they are. And I think in a way, even though we think about them taking things that are similar, well, this shows the differences between this particular class of objects, which I think is really fantastic.
So same function, but very, very different implementations. What about you, Verena?
And another thing that I want to add to Fred is very good about the lines, is most photographs you look at, you're looking at them and there's a certain emotion. These you look at and basically they're totally objective. There is no emotion, and they're also very unsentimental. So it's very unlike a lot of other photography that you see. That's why they're in the middle of documentary and art. And that's why they were the first ones doing it. And when they taught at Düsseldorf, the academy, they had some very, very famous photographers that became excellent because of the Beckers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like one of my questions I always ask about this, it just grabbed me from the first time I ever saw this, which by the way was at San Francisco's amazing Pier 24 gallery, which sadly we're finding out is going to be closing in about a year. And I don't even know why so much, but there's just something about this I find very captivating. Let's move on to one of the a non-typology, one of the images of just a single object, this grain elevator. And I think, Fred, when we walked around the gallery, you said that you were really you really loved this image. What about it grabbed you?
Well, one thing that you'll see in some of the images we'll show you in a bit is that there's actually a lot of detail in a lot of the images that they take, especially when we go inside and take they took photos of these pipes that are very complicated and lots of movement. This is about as solid and plain and unadorned, and it kind of really speaks to like modernism in a certain way, that very sort of clean aesthetic. Now, something I'm going to throw in here, which I listened to a talk about this very same exhibit when it was at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, where it opened, is that the Beckers took photographs at a time in the development of industry where all of the workings of these objects were exposed. You could drive by and see what was going on. You could see how they functioned. Later on, this person described, which I found very interesting, a lot of this kind of work was concealed in large factories. They were actually referred to as sheds, where you had no idea what was going on inside. They said actually the U.S. automobile industry came up with this approach essentially to industrial architecture in and around Detroit in the manufacturing of cars. And although this is not an example of that, I think somehow it suggests the idea that what's going on inside is something we cannot see and is probably maybe more interesting to look at. More going on in there. We just see this exterior plain shell, which maybe, it has some, I think, aesthetic appeal, but it's almost suggestive of the industrial activity going on behind it.
Yeah, so sometimes we get a sense of what the function of the object is, sometimes not as much as in the case of this grain elevator. Let's take a look at another one. So here's another building, industrial. It's kind of maybe not so much clear what goes on in this one. Let me ask you, Verena, what do you like, or what are your thoughts? What's your reaction to this image?
This is sort of, to me, but it's not one of my favorites, I have to say that. It's so unlike the Bechers, because that large building, if it didn't have the construction in front of it, it could be a dwelling. People could be living there. And that little house on the side, actually, I really think that people are living there. I'm from Germany, where whenever you see these things, people are living very close to it in an amazing way. And that's sort of what is intriguing me about this, that there actually are people around these industrial structures. And of course, that he got in the water. It's just wonderful the way, that he did it, the diagonal lines, and again, the horizon is white and low, and again, no people in there. So it's just to me, it's unlike what the Bechers are normally doing.
Yeah. And then you were talking about, people dwelling in some of these buildings, but let's talk about people. So, well, actually, we'll look at this one first. This is another gas tank that's kind of, I'll just say what kind of my reaction to this is. It reminds me a lot of things I saw growing up. I grew up on the East Coast in Wilmington, Delaware, and you have, refineries and other industrial sites that are nearby that we would go by. And I remember as a child being really intrigued by all that stuff and wondering, well, how does it work? What am I to think of it? Should I be afraid of it? Because it kind of looks scary. Fred, you grew up in Rhode Island, and you said you had things like this nearby. Did you have an attraction aesthetically to these things, or what was your reaction?
I don't think I had any aesthetic reaction to them. I was aware of them in the visual environment that I grew up in, not immediately by my house, but a certain route we would take into Providence, Rhode Island. There was an industrial area. I remembered seeing these kinds of things. I would say they're part of my childhood, but I don't think I had an aesthetic attraction to them at that time.
Fascination?
It was really more like a very gritty, dark. I think of the buildings as almost being like black, even when the sun was out. But I think some of them were.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling was this is almost like the digestive system of an industrial economy, and you get to see some of this stuff going on. We would drive by this refinery in Philadelphia. Almost every time we went to the city, we would go by it. And one day it had a terrible fire. It blew up, and this is wow, this is really kind of a scary place, but fascinating. So let's get into this idea of people. So these photographs, very, very few of them have people in them. And even when they do have people, they're very small and they're not prominent. And so this is one of the few pictures. In fact, one of my little games I would have people try to play if you go to see this in the gallery is see if you can count the total number of people in all the photographs. I think there's like 70, 60, 70 of these photographs. How many total people you will find. And it's a very small number. It's not zero, but it's maybe, I think, less than 10. And there are a couple people in this photograph that you may or may not see. Does anybody noticing where these people are?
Yeah, the people are, you know that they're an afterthought or that they are not very important to the Beckers. They are on the bottom left. They're very small, but what they do is they give you a sense of the size of the winding tower. They are so small, and these industrial structures are so big. They are gigantic.
So why do you think they made that choice to have as few people in their photographs as possible? Any theories? I don't think we really know for sure.
What's interesting about this one is they could have so easily cropped them out, and it wouldn't have impacted the photo aesthetically at all. So there's some thought into why they were kept in the photo. As I said at the very beginning, they do not comment on the working conditions of the people or the effect of these industries on the communities, either economically or in terms of pollution or anything. I don't know what their thoughts were, but this is just a little bit of a reminder that there are people who run these machines, who presumably benefit from these machines, who made these machines, designed these machines. And as Verena said, in most of these photos, there's no sense of horizon. There's no sense of context, really. And this one, we have the strong sense of place because of being set against that mountain. And the people add to that. These are people who work there, who are involved in some way with the main focus of the image. And it seems like a gesture. It's not something they really paid much attention to, it seems.
Do you agree with that, Verena?
Yeah, basically what he's saying is very erudite, very good. Another feeling I do have about people, once you have people in a photograph, to me, the photograph is not as neutral. Without people, it's a very neutral photograph. It doesn't have a viewpoint. It doesn't have anything. Once you're adding people to it, let's say a little bit bigger than that, you're concentrating more on the people and less on the structure. So I really think it was very important to them to leave some people in, but in general not to add them.
Yeah, because the subject of this photograph is very clear. The subject is the winding tower. And the people, are just kind of like, you're right. I think it does give it scale. So it's just a fun thing to think about when you go to this exhibition. Couple of quotes that we enjoyed. This one about cropping from their son, Max Becker. He says, photography is cropping. You could say that's all it is, ultimately. It's cropping in such a way that you're not missing anything. So as a photographer, what do you think of that, Fred?
Well, I totally agree with it. There is a school of photography, though, that says you need to frame and compose your photo in the camera through the lens, and cropping is a no-no. I do not subscribe to that. I crop all the time. But these folks at least are saying how important cropping is, which I would also translate into how you compose your photo, whether it's done after you take it or while you take it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's something I have to say as a photographer, as a very mediocre photographer, I struggle with. Verena, how about you? What are your thoughts on cropping?
This is totally true for me. When I photograph every day, and basically every evening, in a way, I edit them. And the most important part is thinking about, where do I cut something off? do I cut something off that's important? You have to have a vision of what you are trying to show in order to be a good cropper. I'm in a camera club where people have to edit, and the one thing that people just really don't have an idea about, many of them, they don't know how to crop. And the first thing you see is it's a very strange photograph. The Beckers are right. Cropping is very important.
Yeah. Seeing the comments in chat from Nikki, thanks for that. She says the black and white imagery emphasizes the dreary industry that it is. Images that don't seem much different from what we saw here in the 30s, such as the Spreckle Sugar Factory near Salinas. So there's something kind of stark about them. And the fact that they do them in black and white is certainly really notable. Here's a quote from Hilla Becher. These things are all in the catalog, which is excellent, by the way. And I think it's available from some of our local libraries. I know the San Francisco Public Library has it in their collection if you want to check it out. Hill said, we were fascinated above all by the shape of technical architecture and hardly by its history. So Verena, you talked about this as kind of documentary, but it's kind of documentary, but just really like looking at the form of what we're looking at and not so much of like its context.
That's the amazing thing about the Beckers, because when you're looking at the structures, it's a document. It's basically, it's definitely documentary photography, I would say. But then what the Beckers do, they're putting them into a typography, meaning they're arranging the visuals. And once they arrange the visuals, then it becomes, to me, it becomes art. And then it becomes also aesthetically pleasing. Yeah, it's putting them together. They were the forerunners of art photography. They were still a little bit in documentary, but they are also quite a bit into art photography. And that's what making them so important.
So I want to jump in here and discuss a little bit more this idea of to what extent they are documentary photographers. I would not use that word as a first descriptor of what they're doing. To me, documentation is when you consciously go out to capture the feeling, the history, the personality, the setting of your world. Like someone like the French photographer Eugene Atget, who would walk around Paris taking, pictures of street life, of people, of shops, of buildings. To me, that's documentation. I look at the Beckers as driving around and putting their brakes on their VW van when they saw some structure that caught their eye. I don't think they could care less about, in a way, what they were photographing in terms of kind of its place in society or its place in history. They liked what they were looking at. And to me, that is not documentary photography. Maybe we're just mincing words here, but that's just my take on that.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating idea that they're just drawn to these objects. They see beauty in them into something that's fascinating to look at, without really caring about the whole context. Let's look at, here's one, we've been talking about things that are bringing together similar objects. These are all different. Comparative juxtaposition, they call it, of 9 objects. Sorry about that typo. So why do you think they're doing this? What are they trying to show us here, Verena?
They're showing us every interesting functional structure that they see and they photograph and they search out, and they're all different. These are all, they all have a different function. And so that is what they, and somehow, Fred said something, for instance, in documentaries, some personality. For me now, these images once I look at them more and more, especially the house, there is a personality that I see in there that is coming from within. The outside is neutral and monotone, but the more I look, they do have a certain personality. Maybe I'm just weird, but
No, I get that too. I like that, Verena. Fred, what do you think?
Well, I think this is a really nice study of two things that occurred to me. Symmetry, because some of them are just really magnificent in terms of their symmetry. I'm a sucker for symmetry. And secondly, it really plays nicely with scale, because although all of these fill the images, the frames fully, they're not all the same size. So it's kind of playing a little bit with the idea of, what's big and what's small, but in the image, they're all, the same size in terms of the images themselves. I like that aspect of it. It's kind of almost a playful quality to this one.
Yeah. I have to say, this middle row, I just feel like, you mentioned personality, Verena. These do seem like they could be human figures or something, or a sculpture of a human being.
absolutely. And look at that house in the middle. There are windows. Obviously, people live in there, and somehow it exudes that kind of feeling. Hey, there's something more to that house. And some people say, oh, they are just looking like catalog pictures. Some people are saying that we're not looking at them. This is beyond the catalog. This is not catalog photography. So that's why I said there is personality in it. In a catalog, you don't find the personality. Here, they're showing you the image, but you know that they've seen the image from all sides, that they are walking around it, and that's what they are portraying. To me, I hate to say that, but I see all sides already, although I don't see all sides.
That's an interesting comment, because that's at the heart of Cubism, is the idea of you're seeing all sides, right?
Right.
And it's also notable that it's, the years on some of these, 1961 to 72, it's over a multi-year period, because these are photographs they took at different times. And then they would kind of put them together and see what they thought would fit nicely together. And they were very, very, very selective, so that it took them 11 years to come up with this assemblage of these objects.
Another thing I want to say, when here they are different, is a different functionality. Others, where they all have the same function, water towers, etc., the images are not repetitive. They're all different. And the Bechers are finding the differences in all these same buildings, same function. And that's what's amazing to me.
Let's move on to this one. This is a particularly, this is a little different from a lot of the other ones. I'll say the background isn't just the neutral background. This is something that was painstakingly cut out of a photograph by Bernd Becher. And it must have just taken an incredible amount of attention to detail and time to do that. So it's almost like it's a sculpture in and of itself, a paper sculpture. But what else? What do you guys, Fred? What do you like about this?
Well, I think this is a nice precursor to other images that I think you're going to show soon of these pipes. And I think, to me, the standout quality of this series of the pipes is how organic they are. They could be intestines, they could be arms, they could be legs. And there's a very, I don't want to push this too much, but there's a very kind of anthropomorphic aspect to these series with the pipes. And I think it's hard to see them without sort of using that lens. And I know, I in general, I don't like anthropomorphizing things. I think people do it in all kinds of art forms. But I think in this case, it's kind of like, no pun intended, it's a natural thing to do.
Do you agree with that, Verena? Is that like what's going on here?
I totally agree. And in this case, I think they're just very beautiful. I see if you're in a doctor's office, you generally see the inside of a person. And when you're looking at these photographs in the doctor's office, this to me looks very much like it. This could be your spleen. This could be anything inside your body. Fred is right. They're very, very organic. And that's what makes them, to me, makes them really beautiful.
And I suppose in a way they are like the human body, because sometimes industry replaces the functions of our bodies, whether they're creating energy or digesting, like food industry is constantly digesting our food for us. One way of looking at it. So yeah, here's another set of these pipes. That is, it's another one of their typologies put together. And what was your reaction to seeing this work in the gallery, Verena?
This is some people that friends of mine also that are seeing this that I talk to, they find this utterly, utterly boring and dull to even look at. To me, it is one of the few pieces that I would like to put on my wall. Because it has so much going on in it. They're so different. The functions are the same, but looking at each one, they're built differently. And then you ask yourself, why did they do it this way? Why did they do the other way? Sometimes you feel there was an architect or an artist behind it who says, oh, we should be doing this. So yeah, to me, it's a very, very organic type of photography.
So that's interesting. You mentioned like that not everybody is drawn to this, that there are people have very, very different reactions to this body of work. And Fred, you were kind of calling it a Rorschach test.
Yes.
So tell me more about that thought.
Well, it's interesting. Verena and Rodney and I participated in another discussion of this exhibit with some of our fellow guides earlier this last week. And it struck me, given the very, very different reactions to these photos, that they are like a Rorschach test. To me, how people view these photos say a lot about the people who are viewing them. And some people are, found them kind of relating to the need to categorize and group people and put them in hierarchies, and therefore sort of impose that view on these kinds of images and didn't like them for that purpose. Some people found them extremely cold and formal. Other people found them nostalgic. Other people found them even emotional. So there's a lot of ways that people look at these photos of the Bechers. And, I don't know how the rest of the people on this call are reacting. Maybe we'll have a chance to engage you in that. But
Does anybody in the audience want to share some thoughts on what you're seeing so far? Anybody want, just feel free to unmute and share a few thoughts on your reaction is to this. And if you don't happen to like these, that's perfectly okay too. So anybody want to jump in? We'll keep going. We do want to hear your thoughts. Nikki, do you want to share some thoughts?
Well, you kind of offered up if we like it or not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't appreciate them all that much. I'm so sorry.
If you had $30,000, would you want to spend it on one of these?
It's not enough. It's not enough.
40.
Because the funny thing is the Frankel Gallery over at 49 Geary Street, just a couple blocks from the museum, has an exhibition of the Bechers that all of them are for sale. And I think 35,000 was like kind of the low point.
The lowest.
Yeah, lowest. But you could also spend 180 grand, I think, on some water towers.
Mhm.
I see Mark has his hand up. Mark, go ahead and unmute and share your thought.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think these are beautiful. I often take pictures of things, I don't know if you want to call these prosaic items in our lives, kind of amazing. And these are just, I think they're wonderful. And on top of that, they're just so well done technically. A lot of times when you take pictures of things like this, it's really hard, to get the right exposure where something's not blown out and something else is too dark. And these are just amazing.
Yeah, that was something, reading the catalog, their son talked about their process. And just like he said, they would spend all day setting up just to take 1 or 2 photographs. So as you, I know, Mark, that you do photography, and this, as do Fred and Verena. So it's always great to hear how photographers are kind of impressed by their approach. Thanks for sharing that, Mark. We'll continue. So here are some houses. What they call them? What's the word for these? These are. It's a very German, I think, architecture where you can see the
half timber,
and then there's quite a few of these. So you know, this is something people would just probably see going around places in Germany. Verena, since you grew up in Germany, what were your thoughts on this series?
This series is quite interesting because I grew up with all of these houses. I grew up in the big city in the north, but whenever you go south in Germany and outside of cities, there are masses of these houses. There are whole cities where you see each house different and just like that. And to me, even when I was younger, that was mind-blowing. In big cities, you don't see that. And yet they're all different. Not one is alike. Each one has a personality.
That's interesting. That is notable, I think, in their work, that they'll show you things that are very, very similar, but they are all different. What about you, Fred? What's your reaction?
What I like about these is how flat they are. You don't have any sense of the rest of the house. This could be, you know, like a piece of wood, you know, one side and nothing behind it. You don't have any sense of the structure, just the design of that one facade, which I think is fantastic.
That would be a very funny thing to do in Germany, is just like create just like something like this that just had boards on the other side. It wasn't really a house. So that's great. And I think as photographers, you get really impressed by, like, you know, it doesn't look like this would be a really hard thing to do, but it actually is, right?
Well, they have an idea.
Yeah.
And once they have an idea, they photograph it. And that's so amazing about the Beckers, because they have an idea of what they want to do.
Yeah, and in the catalog, it talks about how Bernd, he was a collector. He collected lots of things, and of course, this is definitely a collection. But Hilla was not a collector, but she was a master at the printing process. So here's some water towers. And one of the things we'll see with the typologies is you've got some, like we just had one with 4, but this one has more than that. And I think the largest one is, you know, it's like maybe 24 of the objects. So what do you think they're telling us with this this typology, this assemblage of these objects?
Well,
go ahead, Fred.
One of the most important things about this series is how these objects, which were, you know, completely utilitarian, some of them, not all of them, had definite thought put into what they looked like aesthetically, design-wise. And the one in the middle in the bottom row, to me, is a great example of that. That did not need to have those beautiful architectural details, those little arches and the little, you know, windows, but it did. So it meant something to that company or to the designer to do something that had some architectural importance or beauty beyond the mere functionality of the structure. And I think we see that in virtually every type of structure that they photographed, that there are examples where there's definitely the eye of the designer or the architect is obvious.
Yeah, so it is interesting. Like, you can kind of look at these and guess where they would be from. And of course, the one here in the middle row on the end, that's clearly in the United States. This is something you see a lot of in the United States. You don't see water towers that generally that look like this too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then Verena, I guess for you, you've traveled around quite a bit. Is that something? Do you get a sense of place from these images?
I mean, as you said, the one that you mentioned is American. You can see it by the word wood. But what you also see with some of the American photographs, they have simpler lines. The lines are just simple. This is basically a vertical and just a little mushroom on top. It's yeah. What they also said, photographing in Europe or photographing in the United States. In Europe, it's easier because they all belong to the government or the cities. And so they easily can go in there. In America, they had a dickens of a time because they are private to be allowed to photograph. And when they photographed, they had to have a foreman or the manager with them. And I mean, that really hinders your photography. So.
Yeah, let's I've got some pictures of them. Maybe we'll come back to this one. I've got some pictures of them working, and we should probably talk about that a little bit. This, by the way, is their book that they came out with in the early 1960s, Anonymous Sculptures. So they're kind of calling these industrial sites, anonymous forms of sculpture, even though that was not the intent when they were created. Of course, they were created for industry, but these guys are kind of plucking, these are like found objects, something we see in modern art. And they're saying, no, we consider this, and when we photograph it, we're calling them sculptures. And here's a picture of them working on doing their photography. What is notable about what they're doing? I know, Fred, you mentioned the VW van that they would use. What do you got? What stands out to you about how they are, the equipment they're using and how they're approaching their subjects?
Well, I answer because I think Fred is looking at something. Here you can see it is not easy to photograph. On the upper one, they're going around in a van. But look at the tripod and look at Hilla. Hilla is taller than the tripod. On the bottom one, basically the tripod to them is a ladder of, on several sides. And it's not that easy, I'm sure, to stand on top of the ladder in order to photograph. So that to me is really important to see how they are photographing their subjects.
Yeah, and it was kind of dangerous. That's something their son talks about, that they were wearing hard hats and there was some risk. And then when they came to the United States, they didn't necessarily have permission to take photographs of some of their the factories that they would go to. So they're really taking some risks for their art. Here's another picture of them coming, with their, you can get a much better sense of this enormous camera, which, as you guys mentioned, had the lens that you could rotate in, I guess, 360 degrees. And see, Fred, by the way, are you back? Good. I knew you had your internet was kicking you out. If Jennifer, if you can pin Fred again, that would be great. Here's a picture of young Max. I think he was born around 1960, working with them. And he became a photographer himself. And he, like his parents, he also does photography with his wife, which was pretty cool. So one of the things we were really struck by the way, a lot of the slides I got came from our fellow museum guide, Nick Despoda. And so Nick did this one thing with this set of winding towers that I think is really, you look at them and you're like, oh, these things really work together, but I'm not really sure why. But he noted the orientation of the angles and how it really is kind of perfect. There's a real method to what they're doing. There's a real pattern going on here. Do you both, Fred, let me ask you, what struck you about this study of their photographs?
Well, I like Nick's analysis because I think it just makes very clear what they were trying to do with this particular layout, because obviously with those angles like that, I mean, it would be possible to have perfect symmetry among the whole set of images, but I think they kind of, the corners kind of anchor the photo to me, because the angles are similar in terms of, like, you know, pointing toward the middle on the upper left, upper right, lower left, and lower right. And I think, again, it has a little bit of a sort of almost like a balletic, or, you know, it suggests movement from one image to the next.
Also, I think what Nick had done, because it was his doing the lines, that also shows the way they're arranging the photographs, because apparently they put all their work on the floor and then they are standing above and moving them around. So what they're thinking about, I'm sure, are the lines that we have just seen. You know, on the right, it all angles, you know, to the right. On the left, it angles to the left. And in the middle, there is, you know, one left, one right, and one up. And I think it's a magnificent way of putting them together.
You know, one of my goals with this show was to really kind of almost ask you guys why I like this. My first reaction to seeing this was, oh, this is really cool. I really love these photographs, and I don't know why. And maybe unconsciously, something like this is appealing to me. Also want to get to, we were talking about a photograph that they did of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, that is a reference to another famous photographer. So this is a graveyard scene in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, that very famous steel town overlooking the factory. And then this is a photograph from Walker Evans from probably about 30 years before. So what, like, Fred, what's notable to you about the relationship between these two photographs?
Well, clearly they were struck by the same, I would say clearly, but the juxtaposition between kind of, you know, to oversimplify maybe, life and death. You know, it's the whole life cycle of the scene in that place. You have death in the foreground, residential, people who are alive in the housing in the midground, and then the industrial factory in the background. And if you really want to take it even further, you have a sense of the city that this whole scene is located in. That's a very, very background part of this image. If you go back to the Becher one and kind of compare, not dissimilar, you know, sort of like all stages of life, the work life, the living, the real life, and death in the foreground.
Mm-hmm.
You know, also I love like the blacks and the whites,
Mm-hmm.
the contrasts in both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, interesting. Go ahead, Verena.
Also, what I find interesting in these is, for the first time, they're putting emotion in there, because it's a graveyard, and in the back is industrial, basically nothing, buildings. And then you have a graveyard. Whenever you see a graveyard, there is an emotion. And that is what, these are the only two this is the only photograph really where they have something that you emote to, that you think, oh my God, you're thinking two ways, in this industry and then dead people, like Fred was saying, the circle of life.
Yeah, and maybe these are people who were kind of consumed by the industry, like they put their life into the industry and now they're, you know, they're buried nearby.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that,
I mean, to Verena's point, this really has probably more sort of an emotional story than any other image in the exhibit. This is all about place. This is not about the aesthetics of those structures.
so it's a little, it's not at all typical of what you'll see when you go to the exhibition. Kind of
And I think I love this image. I think it's actually one of their best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has everything. It has the graveyard, it has the houses that are behind it, and it also shows how close the living quarters of people are to the industrial structures. I mean, this just really shows it all: death, life, and then perpetuity or whatever in the back. Fred is right.
So I think we're gonna show one more Becher image, and then I want to get into some images that from photographers that they inspired, including both of you. But here's, like, this was kind of interesting: industrial facades, And so there's industry going on inside of these, but why do you think they want us to consider these structures? What's notable about them? Either one of you.
Well, I'm going to go back to my sort of aesthetic considerations thing. Number one, definitely the hand of an architect or designer in most, if not all of these. Secondly, the tremendous sense of the verticality of lines. The structures themselves, the lines on the structures themselves, everything about this picture, these photos say to me, vertical, vertical. And the symmetry again.
And what about you, Verena?
They're just amazing. They're just showing that people, there are structures of function, and that a functional structure does not necessarily have to be boring, just some lines. Somebody here took great care, whether it's an architect, I don't know who it was, the owner of that thing, to make it nicer. There are not only lines up and down, there are also circles. And to me, there's a lot of visual interest in these.
Right. Actually, Verena, I'm so glad you pointed that out. There are arches in every single image. Everyone has arches.
True.
And they don't need to have arches. They have arches by and large for aesthetic reasons. Possibly with
No, I think so. Especially when you see, like on the upper two on the right on the top row, arches within arches.
Mm-hmm.
It's very classical. There's a classical element to those designs that you see in neoclassical buildings all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to move to some works that were inspired by the Beckers. This was one that Nick found that I thought was really great, where this artist took all of like the typologies and kind of juxtaposed them on each other to create like this composite, and just shows, I don't know, to me it shows like how tightly composed these things were, and how they really had, each of these objects had almost the same composition. But what do you guys think as photographers? What do you think is notable about this work?
This is, now I may be overdoing it for people that are listening. This is almost like a Gerhard Richter photograph, where he photographs people or anything, but they're all diffuse, just like these. And this is just a trend at the time that was coming in, where you don't necessarily show everything in sharp detail. So, and that's what anyway.
Yeah, and Fred?
I'll just add one thing. I love these images, and I looked up the photographer Idris Khan. He specializes in superimposing similar images, and one of his projects was superimposing all the scores of all the Beethoven piano sonatas. So he's into this kind of multiple exposure, out of focus thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then you mentioned Gerhard Richter, and it makes me think about how some of Gerhard Richter's urban paintings are notable for, again, not having people in them. Like that's something he does also. Mm-hmm. Our friend Nick, he did his own little study. This is, I believe, on the left. This is something the Beckers did with gas storage tanks, and then Nick did something with using tomato cans, because that's Nick. Nick is always he loves like having fun with art. But let's talk about both of your sets of work. So Verena, these are some photographs that you took, and I asked if you had anything that was inspired by the Beckers, and you sent me these. So tell us about these photographs. And
yeah, since I started to photograph in the early 70s, and in the 80s, a friend of mine has a cabin in Montana, and I've seen the Beckers work, and driving through the Midwest, Idaho, Wyoming, I started taking photographs. These are all silos or parts of silos. And that's why I really love the Beckers. I'm just copying what they are doing. And I have over 1,000, 2,000 photographs of silos, all taken within the last 30 years. Yeah, I can, it's just admiring the Beckers.
And had it not been for their body of work, maybe you would, like, they informed your eye, like you see things you wouldn't have seen had you not seen their work.
Absolutely, yes.
And you've been a fan of theirs since like the 60s, right?
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some of Fred's photographs. So Fred, you want to tell us about this one?
So this is actually sculpture. And what's interesting, we didn't see photos that the Beckers took of these kind of like do-it-yourself mini oil rigs that people did in the rural parts of like Pennsylvania and stuff, which have this more organic look than the really like hardcore industrial stuff that they took. So it's hard to compare this to the Beckers that we've looked at today, but it does kind of resonate with some of the other images they took at other times. So move on to the next one, be better.
Yep.
Can you move on?
This one that some of you may recognize.
You can scroll through these as I talk.
Oh,
So the next several
Okay.
images are taken from around Pier 70, just east of Dogpatch area, which is being big renovation project now. And I was only vaguely aware of the Beckers when I took these, but clearly I was sort of moved by some of the same things that got them excited. I like industrial photographs. I love industrial areas that are falling apart, which Pier 70 certainly was. And I spent an afternoon down there one day taking photos like this, which, I guess you can say were at least subliminally influenced by the Beckers.
Yeah, and then I just interviewed an author who wrote a book called Hunter's Point that he uses this image on the front cover. It's a painting of it, but this is like such a fascinating structure. It isn't a sculpture. It was a crane that was used for the military
Right.
for many years, but now it's still there. It's not used. I don't think it's used for anything at all anymore.
Yeah.
I have a question to Fred. And in your photographs, I mean, they are just great the way they are. And nowadays, everybody's photographing in color. Why did you decide, was it the Beckers, or to do black and white? Because they are powerful in black and white.
Okay, this is confession time, and I know it's being recorded, so it's posterity. But these were taken in color, and I processed them for this presentation, including Verena, including neutralizing the skies to make them free of any kind of clouds or anything else. So I sort of Beckerized my images.
This is my favorite photograph of yours. It's wonderful. I would put it on my wall.
It did come out well in black and white. I really, really have to agree.
Yeah. I love the vertical lines and then the angles, and boy, it is really a fun image. And this is, you said it's Pier 70, right?
Yes.
Pier 70. By the way, if you are in San Francisco, Pier 70 is a fabulous place to visit. It's right next to Crane Cove, and it's being renovated. It's all this old industrial stuff from the Bethlehem Steel Company. It's where the BART tube was fabricated, and so it's if you like this sort of thing, if you like walking around and photographing it, it's a great place to go. Mm-hmm. So we are at 2:00, and I guess we should wrap up and just tell people, you should definitely try to go and see this exhibition at SFMOMA. It's on the 3rd floor. It's there through April 12th.
April 2nd.
Oh, April 2nd, excuse me. And definitely worthwhile. There's also other great stuff at SFMOMA. Fred, you mentioned the Sika exhibition that's there, I guess, for the next couple months or so.
At least, yeah.
And then, of course, the Joan Brown, which we talked about 2 weeks ago. And can't say enough good things. We're going to do a Joan Brown part 2, but we're not going to be able to do it until after the show closes. So Jeanette Pettibone will be back, and she and I will talk more about some of the images we weren't able to get to 2 weeks ago. Verena, Fred, it's always great talking to you about art. I'm really glad we did this. I had so much fun.
Thank you.
using
Thank you for
gallery.
hosting us.
And thank you, Nikki, and the Community Living Campaign, as always, for hosting this show, because it's always a lot of fun for me to do these.